Nobody knew why the Mafia boss feared this one man. The silver camera clicked once, and somewhere on the Amalfi coast, a man who was supposed to be dead exhaled smoke into the dark. Serafina Moretti didn't see him. She never did, not at first. She only saw the frame, the way light pooled on wet cobblestone below Positano's cliffs, the way a figure at the edge of the marina turned his shoulder half a second too fast, as if he'd felt the shudder before he heard it. She lowered the old Leica-style camera from her eye and did what she always did. She looked again, without the lens this time, to see if the world matched the photograph. It didn't. The man was already gone. Her fingers found the camera's worn silver body, the way another woman might touch a rosary. Habit, comfort, a small ritual against a large world. It had been her grandfather's, then her father's, then hers, and it had outlived every editor who'd ever told her a story wasn't worth running. She wound the film forward with 2 practiced clicks, tucked the camera into the canvas satchel at her hip, and kept walking along the marina wall as if she hadn't just photographed something she wasn't supposed to see. 3 villas up the cliff. Golden light spilled from a mansion built into black stone, the kind of house that didn't advertise the danger inside it. It didn't need to. The water below carried the low thrum of an idling yacht engine, patient, waiting. She didn't know yet that the man in her photograph had a name whispered only in kitchens and confessionals. She didn't know that the man who owned the villa above her had spent 15 years hunting a ghost. She didn't know that the roll of film in her satchel, and one hidden inside a locked cabinet 300 meters up that cliff, were about to become the same story. She only knew this: someone had been watching the marina long before she arrived with her camera. The question was, who had been watching whom? Before Massimo Rinaldi's name ever touched her ears, Serafina Moretti's world was built out of dark rooms, deadlines, and doors that closed in her face. She had once been the photographer newsrooms fought over, the one who could find the detail that broke a story open, the fingerprint on the wine glass, the mismatched shadow in a politician's alibi photo. She noticed things. It was not a gift so much as a discipline, built over years of staring at contact sheets until her eyes ached, until she could tell you which frame in a roll of 36 was lying to you. Then she published photographs connecting a shipping conglomerate to a financier who vanished off a yacht in the Tyrrhenian Sea, and within 4 months, no reputable paper in Italy would return her calls. Her editor at the time, a tired man named Bruno who had once championed her, told her over the phone that the pictures were impressive work, genuinely, and then never called again. She noted the compliment. She noted the silence after it. She filed both away, the way she filed everything, without heat, without tears, for later use. She kept working anyway. Freelance restoration jobs, archive digitization for small museums, a wedding here and there, though she hated the artificial smiles. She kept her grandfather's camera loaded even when she photographed nothing but insurance claims, because a photographer who stops carrying a camera has already quit, and Serafina Moretti did not quit. The offer came on a gray Tuesday, a private curator position at an isolated estate on the Amalfi coast, cataloging a family's art collection, generous pay, immediate start, no questions about her employment gap. She almost said no, then she read the name of the estate's owner and recognized it from a financial filing she'd once traced for 11 sleepless nights before her career ended. Massimo Rinaldi. She said yes before she let herself think better of it. 3 days later, a black car met her at the base of a cliff road she hadn't found on any map, and a man in a dark suit opened the door without a word, without meeting her eyes, as though she were cargo already accounted for. She stepped through the gates of the Rinaldi estate carrying 1 suitcase and 1 silver camera, and did not yet know she was walking into the middle of a 15-year-old lie. The first time Serafina saw Massimo Rinaldi, he was not commanding a room. He was standing perfectly still in the doorway of his own library, watching a member of his staff fail to move a crate of paintings without damaging the frames, and saying nothing at all, which frightened the staff member far more than shouting would have. Serafina, who had not yet been told who he was, walked past both of them, crouched beside the crate, and adjusted the angle of the lift herself. "You're carrying it like luggage," she said, to no one in particular. "It's a Caravaggio school piece, not a suitcase. Support the frame, not the canvas." She didn't look up to see who was listening. When she finally did look up, the room had gone quiet in a way she didn't yet understand. The particular silence of men who had watched their employer's face for a warning sign and found none. Massimo was watching her with an expression she would later learn was rare on him. Not anger, attention. "You didn't ask who I was before you corrected my staff," he said. "Should I have? Everyone does." "I was talking to the painting," she said. "Not to you." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite a smile, more the ghost of the memory of one. Massimo Rinaldi did not trust easily. He had built an empire on the conviction that trust was a door left open for exactly the kind of betrayal that had once burned his family's house down and taken his brother with it. He had not let anyone correct him, publicly or otherwise, in longer than he could remember. And yet here was a woman who had not even bothered to notice he was dangerous. A small girl's voice cut through the tension. His housekeeper's granddaughter, 6 years old, trailing after Massimo the way she always did when he visited that wing. She stopped in front of Serafina and studied the camera hanging from her shoulder with open, unguarded delight. "Is that a real camera? Not a phone?" "Very real," Serafina said, crouching to the girl's height without hesitation. "Older than your grandmother, probably." The girl laughed, a bright, unafraid sound that did not belong in that house, and reached out to touch the camera's silver body. Massimo watched this exchange the way a man watches a bridge he isn't sure will hold his weight. The child never approached strangers. She had learned, the way all children in that house had learned, to read a room before she trusted it. She trusted this one instantly. Massimo said nothing else to Serafina that day. He simply turned and left the library, already deciding something he would not explain to anyone, least of all to her. What would you do if the most dangerous man in the room decided, without a single word of explanation, that you were allowed to stay? Nothing about the following weeks looked like romance. It looked like proximity, and proximity, in a house built on secrets, is its own kind of intimacy. Serafina cataloged the Rinaldi collection room by room, and Massimo began appearing in doorways he had no reason to be standing in. He never asked what she'd found. He simply watched her work, the way a man watches weather he cannot control, and has stopped trying to. He gave every guest in that house a formal greeting and a closed door by 9 o'clock. He gave every member of his staff clear instructions and no further conversation. He gave Serafina, without ever announcing it, unrestricted access to the East Wing Library, a privilege no one else in the estate had held in 15 years. She noticed. She said nothing. She filed it away. One evening, she found the locked cabinet in the estate's private study, an old silver camera inside it, film era, beautiful, clearly untouched in years. She reached for it out of pure professional instinct, the way she reached for anything that looked forgotten and important. "Don't touch that." Massimo's voice came from the doorway, low and immediate, stripped of its usual composure. She withdrew her hand. "Whose is it?" He didn't answer. He crossed the room, closed the cabinet himself, and stood with his hand flat against the wood for a moment longer than the gesture required. She recognized the posture. She had made it herself, once, standing over a box of her father's old negatives after his funeral. unable to open it and unable to walk away. She didn't press him. She simply set her own grandfather's camera on the desk beside the cabinet, a small, unspoken offering, one relic acknowledging another, and left the room. Later that week, she found him in the estate's lower courtyard at 4 in the morning, sitting alone beside a fountain that had been dry for a decade. His tie loosened, a burner phone in his hand that he was not using. She didn't ask why he was awake. She sat down on the fountain's edge beside him, close enough that he could feel she wasn't leaving, far enough that he didn't have to acknowledge her. "You don't sleep?" she said eventually. "Not a question. Sleep requires trusting the house will still be standing in the morning." And it hasn't been, before. He looked at her then, and for one unguarded second, she saw the boy who had lost a brother and a home in the same night, still living behind the eyes of the man who ran an empire. He said nothing else. The silence between them said more than either of them intended it to. Around them, his household had begun, without instruction, to make small accommodations for her. A chair pulled out before she reached the table, her coffee remembered without being asked. A guard who had never once used her name now saying, "Signorina Moretti," instead of nothing at all. Through all of this, Vittorio Caruso circled the edges of her days like a warm current. Charming, attentive, endlessly helpful, the consigliere who brought her archived documents she hadn't requested and answered questions about the family's history with practiced, generous detail. He was, everyone agreed, the reason the Rinaldi organization still functioned at all. She thanked him for his help. She kept a small, private list of every date his stories didn't quite match. The wrongness announced itself quietly, the way real danger usually does. Not as an explosion, but as a detail that didn't fit. Serafina found it in an old ledger Vittorio had personally handed her, dated the week of the massacre that destroyed the Rinaldi family 15 years earlier. A single supply requisition, time-stamped hours before Vittorio claimed he'd arrived at the estate that night. She stared at it for a long time, the way she used to stare at contact sheets, waiting for the frame that lied. She mentioned it to Massimo carefully, without accusation. "Vittorio's timeline from that night? I think there's an inconsistency." Massimo's jaw tightened, not at her, but at the name. "Vittorio has spent 15 years piecing my family back together from ash. Don't build ghosts out of paperwork, Serafina. I'm not building anything. I'm reading what's already there." "Then read something else." It was the first time he had spoken to her like she was staff. She absorbed it without flinching, the way she absorbed every dismissal that had come before it in her life, and said nothing further. But she didn't put the ledger down. That night, alone in her room, she photographed every page of it with her grandfather's camera, film she would develop herself, in a dark room no one in that house knew she'd built, out of a disused pantry. 2 nights later, driving down the mountain road from the abandoned monastery where she'd gone to photograph a fresco for the collection records, her brakes failed on a hairpin turn in the middle of a thunderstorm. The car slid toward the cliff edge and stopped only because it struck the guardrail hard enough to crumple its frame. She sat in the wreck for a full minute before her hands stopped being steady enough to unlock the door. Massimo arrived within the hour, and for the first time since she'd known him, his composure came apart entirely. Not into softness, but into fury, cold and absolute, directed at every man on his payroll who couldn't tell him how her brake line had been cut. "You're leaving the estate tonight," he told her, standing in the rain, his voice raw in a way she hadn't heard before. "No," she said. "Someone tried to kill you." "Someone tried to stop me," she corrected, "which means I'm close to something. If I leave, I lose it. I'm not leaving." He looked at her the way a man looks at a decision he cannot undo, and did not argue further, which frightened her more than an argument would have, because it meant he had already decided he could not make her do anything she didn't choose herself. He turned back toward the car wreck and gave an order to his men in a voice she'd never heard him use before. Quiet, precise, absolutely without mercy. Neither of them said what they were both now certain of. The threat hadn't come from outside the family. It had come from inside it. She didn't run to him with what she found. She sat with it first, alone in her pantry darkroom, watching the truth surface on wet paper under red light. The film from the silver camera in Massimo's locked cabinet, the one she'd finally opened, 3 sleepless nights after the accident, using a key she'd noticed hanging in plain sight on Vittorio's own ring during one of his helpful visits, held a single roll of undeveloped film hidden inside the camera's film chamber. The photographs showed the massacre, the night that ended the Rinaldi family as it once was. And there, in the final frame, standing at the edge of the destruction, with no injury, no urgency, nothing but calm, was Vittorio Caruso, hours before he claimed to have arrived. Beside him, half turned from the lens, stood a face Serafina had seen once before, from a distance, at the edge of a marina wall, in a photograph she'd taken without meaning to. Adriano Vale, the man everyone believed had died that night. She laid the 2 photographs side by side under the red light and understood, in the particular silent way that understanding sometimes arrives, that she had been photographing the same lie from 2 different decades without knowing it. She thought of the ledger. She thought of the breaks. She thought of Vittorio's warm hands and warmer smile, and the specific, careful way he had always steered every question about that night into the same well-worn story. She did not go to Massimo. Not yet. She copied the photographs twice, hid one set inside the lining of her suitcase, and sat with the second set until dawn, building the sequence of events the way she used to build a story before she ever wrote a word. She found Vittorio the next morning in the estate's sunlit study and watched his face when she mentioned, casually, that she'd finally cracked the meaning of a coded phrase in one of the old ledgers. For one unguarded second, the only one she would ever see from him, something genuine crossed his face. Not menace, grief. "You think I wanted this to take 15 years, he said quietly, before catching himself, before the warmth slid back over his features like a door closing. Massimo was never going to be strong enough to run this family as he was. I made him strong. Everything since has simply been maintenance." He believed it. That was the part that would stay with her longest. Not that he had lied, but that somewhere inside the lie, he had built himself a reason that almost made sense. She left the room before he could see that she now knew everything. The storm broke over the coast just after midnight, and with it came Vittorio's men, moving through the Rinaldi estate's corridors as the power failed and emergency lights flickered gold against black stone walls. Serafina did not wait in her room for someone to come find her. She moved first, down through the estate's lower level, into the Roman-era tunnels beneath the cliffs, the original photographs sealed against her chest inside her jacket, her grandfather's camera slung across her body out of a reflex older than fear. She knew the tunnels better than most of Massimo's own men. She'd mapped every inch of that estate for her catalog work, and now the work saved her. She reached the ruined monastery chapel above the estate just as Vittorio arrived there himself, having gone to retrieve and destroy the crypt evidence he'd never known she'd already photographed. He turned, and for the first time, his composure genuinely failed him. "You don't understand what you're holding," he said. "I understand exactly what I'm holding," Serafina said, stepping into the candlelight, her voice steady in a way that made 2 of his own men hesitate. "I'm holding the reason you've spent 15 years making sure a man who trusted you never learned who actually destroyed his family." Behind her, moving through the hidden passage beneath the chapel floor, Adriano Vale emerged at last from 15 years of shadow, and a moment later, Massimo arrived through the main door, gun drawn, aimed at the ghost he'd hunted for a decade and a half. Serafina stepped between them. "You spent 15 years hunting the man who saved your life," Adriano said quietly to Massimo, not moving, not flinching from the gun. "Your brother didn't disappear that night, Massimo. He survived. He's been alive this whole time, working with me from the shadows to bring you exactly what's in her hands right now." Massimo did not lower the gun. He looked, instead, at Serafina, not at the photographs, not yet, but at her face, searching it the way he had searched every room he'd ever walked into, looking for the lie. She held his gaze and did not look away. "I didn't come here to save you," she said. "I came here to show you the truth. What you do with it is yours to decide." Have you ever stood in a room and realized the person everyone trusted was the only one who'd never told the truth? Massimo lowered the gun a fraction of an inch. Not surrender, but recognition. And Vittorio, watching his 15-year construction collapse in real time under candlelight and thunder, made the mistake of reaching for the weapon at his own hip. Massimo's men, who had been watching Serafina defend their boss's family with nothing but paper and conviction, moved before Vittorio's hand finished closing around the grip. It was over before the storm outside had reached its peak. Vittorio Caruso's empire, built on 15 years of careful, patient lies, ended in the candlelit ruin of a chapel he had once used to hide bodies of evidence, undone by a photograph he had never known existed. 3 weeks later, the storm had long since passed, and the Rinaldi estate's East Wing library smelled of coffee and turpentine and old paper. The smell, Serafina had come to realize, of a house finally being lived in rather than merely defended. Massimo's brother, thinner and older than the photographs from before, sat at the long table sorting through restored artwork with the same quiet attention Serafina recognized in Massimo himself. The housekeeper's granddaughter had claimed the silver camera as her personal responsibility and had appointed herself official documentarian of the estate's ongoing slow reconstruction. She photographed everything, badly and joyfully, and no one had the heart to correct her grip. Massimo found Serafina on the terrace at sunset, where the sea below the cliffs had gone the color of struck copper. He didn't say anything about gratitude. He simply set something on the stone railing beside her, his brother's old silver camera, restored, cleaned, loaded with fresh film. "It should be used," he said, "not kept in a cabinet." She picked it up, turned it over once in her hands, the way she'd turn over anything worth trusting, and lifted it to her eye. Through the viewfinder, she found him exactly where he stood. No scar hidden, no gun at his hip, nothing shielded from the lens. She didn't take the photograph immediately. She lowered the camera instead, and looked at him without it. "Why did you stay?" he asked, "when you had every reason to leave?" "Because underneath the monster everyone feared," she said, "I found the man you were before they taught you to become one." He looked out toward the sea for a long moment and said nothing. The kind of silence that, in that house, had once meant danger, and now meant something else entirely. That night, for the first time in 15 years, he removed the gun from beside his bed and locked it in the same cabinet that had once held his brother's camera. The cabinet, this time, stayed unlocked. Serafina never stopped noticing what other people overlooked. It's what saved her, and it's what saved a family that had forgotten how to trust anyone at all. So here's what I want to ask you. Is there someone in your life who sees the parts of you that everyone else walked past? The small inconsistencies, the quiet effort, the version of you that existed before the world convinced you to hide it? Have you ever been the one holding the truth nobody else wanted to look at? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this story moved you, subscribe, because the next one goes even deeper.